Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm Dave Mullins. I'm the Senior Vice President of Client Development at Revolution. I'm also a longtime steering committee member of the National Sports Forum. And on behalf of the NSF, I want to welcome all of you to today's webinar called How Sponsors Can Future-Proof the Year to Come. This is going to be an exciting session. My colleagues from Revolution are going to reveal insights from a recent study that we conducted of 2,000 sports fans to get fan sentiment toward a whole host of issues, including sponsorship in a COVID world, as well as sentiment towards live events pre and post-vaccine. We're going to then pair that data with real-time insights, opinions, analysis from two brand decision makers who we're really fortunate to have today on what the numbers are telling them and how they're thinking about future-proofing their own portfolio for 2021. At Revolution, we're a full-service sponsorship agency, so we work with clients across research, strategy, negotiation, activation, measurement, and this study is going to help inform our clients on making better decisions in 21, and we hope that it'll also be helpful for you as well. But before we get into it, I need to put my NSF steering committee hat on just for a second. I have to say this, if you like what you see today on this webinar, you're gonna love the National Sports Forum Holiday Summit next week. It's gonna be a virtual summit. It's gonna feature 2 days of content, networking, idea sharing. We're gonna have a ton of brand decision makers and property executives attending. So hope you can join us for that. I'll share more information at the end of the session on how you can register for that. All right, with that shameless plug out of the way, let's get started. I want to introduce the moderator of today's webinar, good friend, colleague of mine, Chris Sontag. Chris is the VP of Client Development at Revolution. He's got almost 20 years of experience in the sponsorship space, working on both the rights holder side and at FIFA, as well as on the brand and agency side, including some time with IMG, working on their global visa business. So I want to hand over the virtual mic to Chris and have him take you through today's session. Chris?
Thanks, Dave, for the kind introduction. Indeed, good morning, good afternoon, and potentially good evening to some of you out there. Thanks for joining us today. It's indeed a great pleasure for us at Revolution and me personally to be hosting this webinar today on behalf of the National Sports Forum. I'm even more excited based on the illustrious guests that we have joining us today and the topic of our discussion, as Dave has already introduced it, how sponsors can future-proof the year to come. So with many variables in place any given year, the outlook on next year specifically is obviously exponentially more difficult than usual. But we see the glimmering light at the end of the tunnel, thanks to the promising news we've all recently received with regards to 2 different vaccines that have been approved now for distribution worldwide, and hopefully with more to follow. As we know, necessity is the mother of invention, and like all of us in our everyday lives, sports has had to adapt to new circumstances on the fly. Empty or scarcely filled arenas have become the norm. Rights holders, media, and brands have had to experiment with new ways to engage fans with lots of trial and error, which has undoubtedly accelerated the digital transformation of recent years even more. And on top of that, social justice movement has obviously made tremendous progress in 2020, and sports again have become a prominent platform for athletes' voices, sparking a change in the nature and the narrative of public debates. So at Revolution, we wanted to find out not only how sports fans feel about what happened this year, but also how they feel about next year as it relates to live events and sponsorships. So while all of us in the industry find ourselves in constant scenario planning, we wanted to draw up a few hypothetical scenarios to get fans' reactions to help brands navigate the future sponsorship activation. So we went out and asked the hard questions, and some of the answers were really, really interesting. So to help us make sense of what the study looked like and what the key findings are, joining us today is Revolution's head of research, Darren Marshall. Darren is born and raised in the UK in Oxford. graduate with over 25 years of experience in the field of research. In 1993, he was one of the co-founders of the leading sponsorship research agency, SRI. He was later promoted to SVP and GM of the Americas for SRI's parent ISL before joining Revolution in 2007, and has been developing research and measurement programs for rights holders and brands around Olympic Games, FIFA World Cups, NASCAR, NCAA, you name it. Darren, it's great to have you with us, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Greetings from Charleston, South Carolina.
To help us put some of our findings into context and discuss directly from a sponsor's perspective, we're indeed really excited to have two well-known brand and thought leaders from the industry joining us today. So first, allow me to introduce Heidi Massibong, the VP of Sponsorships for Shell in North America. As we know, Shell is a partner of some of the top motorsports teams in the world's most competitive championship series, from Ferrari in Formula One to Team Penske and NASCAR and IndyCar, along with doing fantastic work in and around non-endemic team sponsorships in the US, whether within the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NCAA, many others. Heidi is a veteran at Shell. She just celebrated her 25th anniversary last year with the company. Heidi, we're really excited to have you with us. Always a great pleasure talking to you, and hope you're well and you had a great Thanksgiving in Houston.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Last but certainly not least, Ricardo Fort, the head of global sports and entertainment partnerships for Coca-Cola, or as Ricardo likes to put it, one of the best jobs in the industry, which, how I put it, can only be filled by one of the best people in the industry. Truly a global marketer and sponsorship expert, with also 25 years of work experience across Europe, Asia, Latin, and North America for the largest blue chip brands like Visa, Danone, Kellogg's. And at Coca-Cola, Ricardo is responsible for leading all aspects really of the company's relationships with the best sports and entertainment organizations in the world, including IOC, FIFA, UEFA, March Madness, MLS, and many more. And only a few days ago, Ricardo, you announced the extension of the Special Olympics partnership through 2023, which is a fantastic and truly inspiring organization and platform that I also in the past have had the honor on working on. So it's always a pleasure to get your insights. I believe you and I are coming to our 15-year anniversary of knowing each other, going back to the first ever FIFA World Cup Trophy Tour by Coca-Cola in 2006. So that the fond memories of that project will always remain with me vividly for the rest of my life. So Ricardo, thanks for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to join all of you and reconnect with you. Pleasure.
So Darren, without further ado, we have a lot to cover. So I'd say let's dive in and maybe start with a quick overview of how this fan study was conducted.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Revolution designed the study that you're going to see today. We analyzed the data and kind of the conclusions are ours. But the survey was actually fielded by Ipsos, which is one of the top 5 global market research companies and long time partner of ours, one of the best in the business. And we wanted to make this extremely credible, extremely reliable. So we went for a sample of 2,000 sports fans nationally. That's a really, really robust sample. It has a margin of error of around plus or minus 2% on average. So it's a pretty credible study. It was done right at the start of October. So, more or less 2 months ago at this point. But I think you can place a lot of confidence in the data, even down to the individual sports level, because of the large main sample size, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. That's good as an outline for everyone to know. And for the purposes of today, we've bucketed the survey into the survey findings, I should say, into 3 categories: sports consumption hypotheticals, sponsorship impact, And then thirdly, diversity and social justice. So Darren, I would say let's maybe start with the big picture. We've all seen the TV ratings for major sports events this year. NBA finals down 49%. NHL Stanley Cup finals down a whopping 61%. NFL is down 6% at the midway point of the season. So what happened when you asked the fans, whether they were watching more or less sports in general?
Yeah, I mean, we expected it to be less, Chris, based on the just some of the statistics that you've just shared about the NBA finals and some of the individual ratings. But no, the answer is it's actually 59% say they're watching more. So why is that? Well, when you dive into the data, and the little icons you see here represent throughout the deck are going to represent the fan bases of the individual sports. So if it's watching more sports, you'll see some of the logos of the leagues and sports that are going up in terms of consumption, and then you see some of the things that are going down below it. And as you see, it's a trend of the big four kind of stick and ball sports were down. That's consistent with what you were just saying about the ratings. But by the same token, the sports outside of that group are going up, and so it's really a tale of two opposing trends.
That's interesting. So what's driving the decline there?
Well, let's look at the next slide, Chris, and I think you'll see it pretty clearly here. So there isn't one single reason. We let people choose as many things as they like, but the big three things. People were turned off by some of the social protests. People just lost interest when there were no sports. That created a vacuum. There was a feeling, particularly, obviously we were still in the run up to the election at that point. And then obviously we've had hurricanes, we've had, in addition to COVID and all of the other madness of 2020 has, that created a feeling that there was just more important stuff than sports. And then, underneath you see some of this more, minority reasons, people taking up other pastimes, just spending time with family and friends, or and then at the other extreme, 1 in 10 people were saying that, look, there was just too much to choose from, with everything on at the same time. There was only so much that you can watch, and so that had a little bit of an effect. But the big three things you see highlighted there at the top.
Yeah, and we had a presidential election this year, obviously, as well, which, depending on who you ask, is still ongoing. That I assume fell under the category of more important things than sport.
Yeah.
And we've seen the impact on brands' advertising spend on that side as well. So Ricardo, to bring you into the conversation, are you surprised that almost a third of fans cited social justice protests as a turnoff?
No, I'm not. That has been a big topic of conversation this year. I mean, much more than in any previous year. So of course, it divides the attention of everything else that is happening, and to some extent, in some leagues, some events, sports have been more affected than others, as the study shows. There's also the quality of the work that each of the rights holders were delivering, the degree of impact that they had in their sports. So I guess multiple factors, social justice being one important of them.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, social justice is obviously a significant topic here, and we'll do a bit of a deeper dive in that later on in this session. So moving on, there have been a number of alternatives to live events that we know sponsors and teams have tried during the pandemic. Here at Revolution, we ran another shameless plug here, but we drove ran a watch party at Soldier Field in Chicago that was quick to sell out, and have done the same with our continental client across many MLS venues throughout the country. So Darren, when you asked fans about the various alternatives, was there one that stood out from the crowd?
There wasn't really like a silver bullet, Chris, that we could all in the business flood to and say this is going to be a perfect replacement for attending live events. And the fact that you've only got a maximum of 60% for the drive-in experience like we did for Conti, that kind of says to you that there really isn't a perfect alternative to live events. Live events are still compelling, and it's really, really hard to get something that's a perfect substitute. And probably about the best you can do is appealing to about 60% of the fan base. And then the other thing that says nothing's very, very exciting is just the lack of differentiation between all of the other alternatives. You see just like a 5-point spread or a 3-point spread there. So unfortunately we didn't find that silver bullet.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we've seen a variety of live virtual events in the industry this year, right? Trying to replicate either exclusive VIP guest experiences, such as streamed celebrity meet and greets or wine tastings, or broader consumer entertainment. Like I know, Ricardo, you did with the Coke Studio Sessions, which was a virtual music festival over 60 days in the summer. That was designed to unite the world through music and aid communities that were affected by the pandemic, and it was in collaboration with Red Cross and Red Crescent. So Heidi, from a Shell perspective, how is Shell adopted to not being able to reach fans at physical live events or host guests in person?
So this slide would represent a lot of the things that we did in the marketplace as well, Chris. So we obviously shifted very heavily to digital and social, and focused on kind of our 4 categories of the fan perspective, where we utilized our fall race with Las Vegas Motor Speedway and had that virtual VIP experience with a virtual victory lane celebration out there. Our customers, we did the celebrity meet and greet with a lot of our drivers, and that was geared toward our very key specific high-level customers. And then our consumers, we leveraged some of the momentum that had taken place with iRacing in the world of motorsports and utilized that with our fuel rewards and our Gold Plus members. So invite only exclusivity to play in that space. But we also spent a lot of time on our employees. So, you think about how we utilize our sponsorship assets. It's not just externally, but how do we use that as momentum in-house as well? It's been a rough year for everyone. And so Joey Logano made it into the championship. And so as opposed to positioning it as a celebrity VIP, we actually presented it as an old school pep rally for our internal Shell employees and tried to get some momentum behind that. And our US country chair participated in that and was so well received. And I think it was partly because we all needed something fun and positive to look at come this fall. So thank goodness Joey gave us that rallying cry. So
yeah, that's excellent and very smartly done. I mean, we've all had to write and rewrite new manuals on the fly, it seems like. So it'll be interesting to see how or which one of these virtual formats will stay with us. Maybe past the backside of the pandemic. So moving on and looking at some properties specifically, and starting with NASCAR. I mean, as we talked, our rights holders have had to adapt equally on the fly and continue to have to do so. And season and event schedules have been moving targets. The latest example being the Ravens Steelers game that had been postponed 3 times and finally took place yesterday. Some properties have had to introduce new formats and new technologies, and some have been breaking with really old traditions, you could argue. And so we were curious to find out what the fans' take was on some of these changes. And so NASCAR is one that we looked at more specifically. So Heidi, for Shell and Pennzoil, when you look at this stat here, having been a long-term partner of Penske Racing, and as you mentioned, Joey Logano. I'm sure you watched and followed some of these changes, like the double headers that were introduced in the iRacing. What we can see here is that most fans don't want to retain those changes. But what was your opinion?
So I think that a lot of these changes expedited some of the things that we in the industry had been wanting to try, right? So we've all been wondering what would it be like if we had racing in the middle of the week? Could we be successful with that? And I, you know, my personal opinion, I didn't really like it as much as I had hoped, but we needed it for this year to get back on track, you know, no pun intended there, but to keep our schedule moving forward. The double headers, you know, I think it saturates and you lost some of the value that you needed. So I'm happy to hear that the fans didn't like it, because from a brand perspective, I wasn't either very engaged and didn't really like the value that it brought in that space. But with that being said, there were some other things that we tested and tried that I think will go further and do add value to the industry, and that's things like the no practice and no qualifying. So that keeps your crews off the road. They're not gone as long. It reduces the number of people that you do need on the road. So that helps the team keep their costs down. So that better positions us for the future. So there were things that we tried. You see them here on the screen that maybe didn't work quite as well, but there's also some other things that NASCAR did try that I think will be successes that will carry into 2021.
I would say at this point, how about we schedule the same session a year from now, and then we can talk about what other changes we've seen and which ones we like.
Sounds great.
So moving on to another property in MLS. You know, we can see how fans reacted here to some of the COVID-driven changes to the format. For instance, it does look like at least the 5 substitutions rule has a chance to stick, which also internationally FIFA has now decided they're going to extend that to the end of 2021 alongside with IFAB. Many MLS fans would prefer to keep the later start to the season, which is interesting, so later than the traditional March date. But Ricardo and Coca-Cola obviously being official soft drink partner of Major League Soccer. Another interesting takeaway here on the right-hand side for us was with regards to the new virtual advertising technology that MLS introduced during the MLS is Back tournament in Orlando. To remind everyone, back in July and August was one of the first leagues to return to play. You see a screenshot here on the right. There was quite some debate at the time within the industry at whether it was too prominent and too intrusive between the center circle logos. And I know that was actually reduced going into the tournament at some point for Adidas, and the large extended virtual sponsor walls along the touchline. However, when you look at the study here, what it reveals is that very few MLS fans, only 18%, were even aware of it, and among those, as many as 57% are in favor of keeping it moving forward. What's your take on that, Ricardo?
I think as a test, everything is acceptable. Personally, I have some restrictions to the intrusion of branding in the field of play. So I'm not a big fan of brands in over the pitch. So that does not look well for me. The other things that can benefit the action and the quality of the game, like more substitutions, like FIFA implemented. These are things that I hope they can stay. It works in other sports. It should work in soccer as well. And I think it's great if that is kept in the future. So the way I look at all these changes is, this is an unusual year. That gave us the permission to test a lot of different things. Hopefully we learn with some of them and we'll be able to keep the good ones and just eliminate some other ones. What I would not like to see is, because some of them offer potentially new commercial opportunities, that the quality of the show, the quality of the sport is jeopardized to benefit a commercial benefit for the leagues or for the teams.
Yeah, those are great points, Ricardo. And I mean, the virtual perimeter advertising is obviously generally a hot topic, right? In terms of the opportunities moving forward, maybe even going into geo-targeting of messaging. So it'll be fascinating to see where that technology might take us, particularly when you look at the soccer, the football side, between now and the FIFA World Cup 2026. I don't know, maybe by then we'll be seeing our own names and faces on the fieldboard advertising, enjoying an ice cold Coke beverage at the start of the game. Which, by the way, Ricardo, you're infamous for not so subtle product placements. So we're, I think, 25 minutes into this, and I've yet to see it. I'm sure it's still to come.
I'm saving the audience for today, but that's okay. I'm drinking here.
Shifting gears here a bit. So let's talk about the future of live event attendance. Darren, how are fans feeling about going to sports events right now, when looking ahead at if the capacity were still limited and masks were still mandatory and so forth, pre-vaccine?
Yeah, it's sort of what we would have expected, Chris. People are pretty divided. You can see that about half of all of the sports fans kind of across the board would be comfortable to some greater or lesser degree in going to stadiums if those, in that situation, which, and the situation we're describing is what a number of states are experiencing at the moment. Here in South Carolina, that's kind of what it is. You can go to events, but at reduced capacity. Obviously, in other states, you can't do that. But, this didn't totally surprise us. We kind of felt that people would be pretty divided on the subject, and that's what we ended up seeing. And if there was a split, the big four major league sports, people were less comfortable going than with some of the more, the sports outside that group. Obviously big four, sports, NFL games packed, sold out to season ticket holders, college football, et cetera, so that may be part of the driver for that. But this wasn't a huge surprise to us when we asked this question. But what happened next was really surprising.
Okay, so when you say what happened next, I guess we're looking at sort of fasting forward to a few months to a date when everyone who wants to be vaccinated would be. So you would expect that there is quite a significant change.
Absolutely. So the scenario we gave people was, look, you could, as you said, fast forward to a time when the vaccine's around, everyone's had it, there's no government restrictions on attending events, there's no requirement for stadiums to provide, hand sanitizers, you don't have to wear a mask, you can, we've rolled the clock back because everyone's been vaccinated, herd immunity, we're in kind of an idyllic sports world again. And so we asked exactly the same question. So this question, how comfortable are you going to a sports event once that happens, once paradise has returned to the sports world, once the vaccine has, waved its magic wand, how comfortable are you going back at that point? And you see what happens, and I fell off my chair when I saw this. It only makes a 5 percentage point difference. So right now, before the vaccine, with COVID all around us, 49% would be comfortable going to events. Even after the vaccine, only 54% with a proven vaccine. Astonishing. And I think the implication for that is that if you're a stadium operator or a team or anyone really in the live events business, if you thought that this was going to be a temporary thing for the next 6 months or so, you're dead wrong.
Heidi, are you as surprised or possibly even shocked as Darren was?
I'm shocked that it is this low. What I would be curious about is, now that we do know that we have vaccines coming quicker, will that change? So maybe, Chris, maybe we can add this in our 6-month survey when we revisit again, and maybe this can be something, because I would hope that this improves. You know, the one thing about Americans, we do seem to have a shorter memory. So maybe as people get used to this, but I also think we have to respect the fact that our fans have been, you know, shocked to the core on what has happened in their life and the instability on everything within their lives, from their economic background to, you know, do we even have supplies at the grocery store for what we need? And I think people are just gun shy. So to Darren's point, is it going to be, you know, the check mark improvement or recovery, or is it going to end up being more of the Nike swoosh? And I think we're in the Nike swoosh type of recovery than we had anticipated.
Yeah, really good perspective on it. The human psyche can sometimes change quickly, and sometimes it changes very slowly. And obviously this has been as emotional and stressful for the human psyche as the year has been, in at least our generation. So interesting to see how this will change. So what, I guess, question back to Darren is, what does this mean for teams and venues moving forward?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, we asked people, yeah, again, thinking back to those two scenarios of where we've got, you know, kind of where we are now with limited attendance and masks and everything else and social distancing, and then after the vaccine. So you'll see on the next page that we asked people what precautions stadium operators should take in those two scenarios. So this is before the vaccine. Here's what people want to see. Most people want to see masks. No, you know, no surprise there. Most people want to see hand sanitizers and temperature checks and staggered exit signs. And then, you know, be interesting to see if the 23% who said ban on alcohol would have said that anyway, you know. But again, what was fascinating about this is what happens when we roll it forward and say after a vaccine. Well, or very little difference again. You know, people still want mask wearing to be enforced even after a vaccine. You know, it's again, the difference between these two sets of numbers was just really surprising to us. You know, I hope Heidi's right, and you know, now that there are, you know, once the FDA approves these vaccines, people will start to feel more comfortable with it, and these numbers will change, and we'll see. But it was just really really amazing that even when we told them, put yourself in the place where that has happened, where you do have that proven vaccine, it works, everyone's got it, but they're still nervous. You still have to think about putting some of these precautions in place for the long, you know, at least for the next 12 months, probably.
Ricardo, thoughts on this in terms of, you know, are these precautions going to need to be the new norm in the new normal for the longer term?
Yeah, I think for the level of comfort that people have in going back one way or the other, you know, it is surprising. But it's also surprising the idea that anyone would expect things to go exactly back to where they were before. I mean, imagining that we are going to go through all of this and at some point this will all disappear and life will be back at what it used to be is just nonsense. So hopefully with time, people will get a higher level of comfort to being together, being in, you know, venues with at full capacity, assuming there are measures in place, of course, the vaccines and you know, other measures in venue that will give this level of comfort that is required for people to make a decision to go back. But you know, it will be different regardless. Even if we are in a full stadium in the future, we will be different. We will think differently about that occasion, and we have to think about that now, how this is going to be, so we can cater to sporting fans in this new reality.
No matter what happens, our Zoom capabilities will be much improved and stay improved moving forward, I guess. Yeah, great perspective, Ricardo. So moving on to the sponsorship side, Darren, what's the fans' take on sponsorships now this year and what they've seen, and looking ahead at next year?
Yeah, I mean, the first question we asked, Chris, if you move to the next slide here, it's is it appropriate for sponsors to run promotions during a pandemic? Is it just, is it in poor taste almost? But people rejected that notion. More than 2/3 of people say it's just fine for sponsors to, to run those promotions, and more than 3/4 of them would be willing to participate in them. But there is a big but. That assumes that they're respecting social distancing, so the immersive kind of on-site touch feel kind of things, and we'll see that in a little bit more in a moment. The meet and greet, things of that nature. Those people are going to be very nervous about. But if it's something that they can, participate in a socially distanced way, they're absolutely fine doing it.
Ricardo, looking at this and other intel and the scenario planning that you're undergoing, how are you looking at fan promotions in the U.S. For the next few months? Maybe March Madness is an example that's sort of coming up in the more foreseeable future.
Yeah, so not speaking specifically about any activity, because I'm not entitled to disclose that, but I think in general, we're in a position today that and the research confirms that we have the allowance to bring back the excitement that we can add to sports. And the other thing is that I think most fans are informed enough to know how challenging economically the crisis has been to the sporting industry, and the idea that corporations and sponsors are investing, are promoting, is a way to keep money coming to the industry and keep the industry alive. So I think that we cannot ignore this social impact that the sponsors have in investing today, not only in paying the rights fees, but also in promoting and bringing fans back to the extent that is possible to venues, to streaming, to pay-per-view, whatever it is to help generate resources for the industry to keep going. People need sport, and everything we can do as corporate sponsors to help the industry to stay alive and healthy, I think it's welcome, and this is the way I read the numbers.
Heidi, from your perspective, is it sort of, how are you sort of adjusting your sponsorship and entertainment approach with you as NASCAR and IndyCar might be one of the more current conversations you're having internally?
Yeah, Daytona is right around the corner. I think we're 70 some days away from Daytona, and our Pennzoil 400 is right on the heels of that. So we're pivoting and continuing to learn on the previous platforms that we've been working on. So how are we making all of the digital and social even more engaging going into 2021? But we will continue that effort. Because obviously we're not going to be doing a lot of hands-on for at least the beginning of first half of the year.
Understood. Darren, Ricardo can't share details with us in terms of what specifically they have planned. Maybe we can give them some intelligence on what might help their brainstorm. So what sort of promotions will have the most traction next year based on our findings?
Well, when we asked fans what they would like, we gave fans a whole bunch of alternatives, and the things that came out top were sweepstakes and free stuff. Give me free stuff, put me in a sweepstakes for a nice prize. Don't make me touch anything. I don't want to shake an athlete's hand. Some of the things that we were really getting into before COVID. Those types of things, we have to pivot away from that. And so here you see it. I mean, people, it's a fairly simple, basic need. So if you can work around these, and these are, just to be clear, these are promotions at events. So where you might have been having an immersive brand experience, sampling product, et cetera, people don't want to do that right now. It's just a little bit too risky, but they're perfectly happy to enter into sweepstakes and drawings and be given free stuff.
So Ricardo, does that mean you're going to be handing out more free Coca-Cola products as part of your sponsorship approach next year?
I'm taking note here. Everything is check. Yes, we have a little bit of everything.
Excellent. Yeah, keeping it simple seems a key takeaway here in terms of the promotion, but keeping it socially distanced, and as it relates to any form of engagement, certainly in a live venue. Now, you know, at Revolution, we often talk about how sponsor-friendly fans are with regard to different sports. We conduct studies on a regular basis. Most recently did it in the summer, where NWSL actually ranked the most sponsor-friendly of all properties in the US. So Darren, coming out of this recent study, how willing are fans currently to support sponsored products, and how much it impacts their goodwill? Has that changed since the pandemic began?
Yeah, it has, Chris. And I think, you know, we see this pie on the left here. More than 2/3 of fans are saying it's more important now to support sponsors who support my team. And the reason for that is that they know that brands like Shell, you know, Shell has had a, you know, devastating financial year because of the pandemic, with the, you know, because, you know, people are just not traveling and everything else. And so, you know, fans realize that. They also realize what happens to their, you know, in NASCAR in particular, in their favorite driver if the sponsor goes away. You know, because they see it happen every year. The sponsor goes away, driver loses his ride, their guy can't participate anymore, and they're sad. So there is this thing that we call the reward factor, where fans want to feel that in some small way, by buying the sponsor's product, by picking up a 6-pack of Coke versus the opposition, or by filling up at a Shell station instead of another station, they're encouraging the sponsor to keep going, even though Ricardo and Heidi will never know that that particular customer did that. They're doing it for their own, you know, ego, self-satisfaction, and feeling that they're doing something for their favorite team. And so the fact that that's going up, I think it seems logical to me. It's like they realize that the sponsors are hurting as well, and the fact that the sponsors are staying the course, not bailing on the team or the league, is encouraging them, to making them feel even more, you know, friendly towards the sponsor. So that's very much of a positive. But again, you're seeing this thing in the middle here. You know, people are more reluctant to engage physically. It doesn't mean they're not going to engage with sponsors. It just means that you can't have absolute carte blanche like you had before, in terms of giving someone something to hold, to try, to touch, to, you know, interact with. And in fact, you know, a lot of people, as you see on the right here, were saying maybe a donation to good causes instead of, you know, giveaways would be a better thing right now. So good news, I think, for sponsors. We actually did a survey earlier in the pandemic, and we saw this coming through again, and that seems to be holding true even, you know, 6 months into it, that fans are even more sponsor friendly than they were in the past.
Yeah, I find the right hand chart and data point really interesting, and seeing that increase in how fans want partners to support social causes on their behalf. And we're obviously seeing that trend, particularly in younger generations, of wanting to consumers want to have a meaningful relationship with brands, and want to make sure that brands stand for a cause. So Heidi, looking at these, you know, fan sentiments, how important is purposeful marketing and CSR for Shell, and how does that find its way into the business and sponsorship approach?
Yeah, so we focus probably on two major initiatives during the COVID period, and one was our Feeding America. That was a piece that we worked with the NASCAR world, where we use some of our assets to help highlight that and leverage. That's an organization that we sponsor within our retail and our Shell corporate space. And then obviously Joey Logano's foundation, and he this year gave $1 million to different charities. And so we continue to support him in his endeavors as they went into different markets. So we focus very much on in that space. That's always been a very common thing that Shell has done. But for us, you know, I go back to your word when you talked about purposeful marketing. And so this year during COVID, with our team being off the road for a period of time, we really tried to come back to our purpose. And so if you think about what Darren kind of said, the oil industry got walloped this year between COVID and the price wars that have gone on in the Middle East. And so our marketing budgets were really cut dramatically, and we'll probably carry some of that through to 2021. So how do we reevaluate? So we spent a great deal of time with Darren and his team on looking at what is our purpose, our core purpose at Shell, which is, more energy, less CO2, and how do we make sure that all of our sponsorships, as well as our marketing activities that we're doing to support those sponsorships, align with that type of activity. So where do we need to change sponsorships? Where do we need to cut those, and where do we need to maybe just change the direction of how we're activating and looking at those? So we use this time to actually go back and really make sure that we were truly aligned with our purpose for our organizations.
That's excellent, Heidi, and very impressive indeed. We'll move on that topic of purpose and greater social matters when we get to our last section here. How are fans feeling about social justice protests in sports, Darren? We had a stat earlier on that kind of gave us an indication that there was some negativity to protests having found its way into sports, but yeah, there's probably more to it, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and when we look at the data, Chris, on this, 2/3 of fans would prefer there not to be these kinds of protests. To kind of turn the clock back a few years to the point where people weren't kneeling and and so forth. But people also recognize that while they would prefer it not to be there, it is now part of the fabric of sports. It's something that they kind of have to accept. And so given that, that's why you see what might seem as a slightly contradictory statement, in that most fans support the right of athletes to make these protests. So, there's, a seeming contradiction there that really is just part of a reality that you can't wave a magic wand and remove both the causes of social injustice and the protests around it with, just instantly. But we also looked at, a few other, statements, and, most people are supportive of what happened in Washington this year in terms of removing the offensive nickname. Most people would like to see that taken further, and to the point where cheerleaders are no longer part of the sport. Oddly, obviously ironic that the one NFL team that didn't have cheerleaders was in Washington. But there you go. So now that I guess they're fully politically correct in some respects. And again, most fans believe that its sponsors should support athletes who support Black Lives Matter. So that's the view. I mean, there seems to be a pretty clear consensus. And the one thing that I thought was most hopeful, just as the last kind of data point in the survey, was that 3/4 of people believe that sports can reunite and heal our divided society, which I think is a very powerful message, and I think is something that brands, particularly just huge dominant global brands like Coca-Cola, can embrace and get behind, and help use sports to heal as part of the process as we work through this, and not just from a pandemic perspective, but also the divisions created through the election and so on and so forth. So I think that was a message of hope at the end, Chris.
So Ricardo, looking at these fan sentiments, across sports fans in general, what role do you feel sponsors should play within the context of sports as a platform for social movements and athletes as vocal leaders of that?
I think the role for brands is to support athletes and leagues and clubs that are interested in engaging with that. A lot of these things are things that the company supports outside the sports world, and sports has such a high visibility and interest. So the potential impact that the sports industry through the athletes, through the clubs can have in society to advance some of these causes is really important, and we cannot ignore them. So I think we should use all the tools that we have. Well, having said that, there are some considerations in how you do it. You have to have some sort of coordination on leagues and events, so that the athletes and the clubs are allowed to do what they need to do, but in a way that is respectful to everybody's opinions, because that'd be the case when it comes to some international events. There are a lot of people involved, a lot of different opinions. So the moment you allow everybody to express themselves about everything they feel about, it's taken from the moment of that event that serves other purposes as well. So as a sponsor, we're not involved in anything like that, but we are here to support the actors that want to do this in a way that is organized and beneficial for the event and for society.
And I assume you have pretty kind of frank dialogues with your property partners around that topic.
Oh yeah, constantly. Yeah, we talk about that constantly, because this is a change that we believe we can influence, and we use our influence in sports to help drive some of these conversations. And that includes things like equal pay, how you invest, how your gender balance is in your investment. So all of these things are top in our agenda, and we're not ashamed of using our influence and our reach to have this conversation and to drive change.
We love hearing that, Ricardo. Heidi, for obviously NASCAR has undergone quite a bit of change and transformation on many fronts. What are your observations as it relates to sort of topic of diversity and inclusion in that realm?
Well, I would say specifically, they obviously banned the Confederate flag this year, which was extremely impactful. And it was something that needed to happen. I think it was a brave step out for Steve Phelps and his team to do that, but it was much needed. And I think it was needed not just from a social justice perspective, but it was very much needed for where the sport needs to go into the future. And so it needs to become a more inclusive sport. And that was the first step in helping get it to that. So, hats off to the new leadership over at NASCAR for being willing and brave enough to step out there and get that done this year at a very hot moment around this topic.
Excellent. Again, great perspective. Yeah, this brings us to the end of questions that we have prepared for our guests. It's been extremely insightful to get both Heidi's and Ricardo's perspectives on it. So at this point, Dave, if you're still out there, have we gotten some more good questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have a lot of great questions here in the chat. I don't think we can get to all of them in 8 minutes, but I'll go through some of the ones that I thought were most interesting. Question for Heidi: assuming event attendance returns to pre-COVID levels, so to your point on Americans having short memories, to what extent do you see on-the-ground activations coming back in 2021?
I mean, I don't see it coming back from a shell perspective until much later in the year, if it happens at all, because it really hasn't been built into our marketing plans, because we are assuming that, to Darren's point, we're more of a swoosh type recovery. So yeah, I think if it happens, it's going to be very slow. It's going to trickle in maybe Q4.
Got it. One for probably everyone on here: out of all the innovations implemented during COVID, which initiatives do you feel have proven such value that they will be sustained once things return to close to normal as possible. So basically, I think, what innovations have you seen, maybe either professionally or personally, that you like that have come out of COVID that you'd love to see moving forward?
Any takers of the question?
I can throw some. I think that there's been an acceleration on the streaming capabilities. So a lot of new players on the entertainment side, but also on the sporting side, offering content through streaming, and so that's great. There was also an acceleration in content production by a lot of the rights holders that found themselves without events, so they had no choice but start developing content. Now some are ahead of others, but in general, the content production, sporting content production, has increased a lot during this year. And I guess the third and last one that I would say is was the realization from the athletes community that they have a lot more reach and influence that I think they imagined before. So a lot of athletes becoming very active in social media platforms and having conversations with fans and developing their own brands and sometimes their own businesses through social. So these are a couple of positive things that I saw, and I'm hoping that they would stay in the future.
A fun one I'd love for everyone to answer this one. What do you think the next first live sporting event will be that you attend?
I mean, I'm hoping it's Daytona 500.
I don't know if it'll be my first one, but I will be very excited about attending the Summer Olympic Games in Tokyo next year.
I think the first one I'll go will be the Euros in June next year.
Well, I'm hoping to go and see our Citadel Bulldogs football team play. It's one season of spring football probably in the foreseeable future, so I'm kind of looking forward to that and all the tradition and pageantry of the military academy there.
Very
Excellent.
good. Well, on that note, yeah, I think we're out of time, but really appreciate Chris for you moderating. Fantastic job. All the panelists, great discussion. We really appreciate your insights at the National Sports Forum. Two things before we break. We just wanted to let you know that after this webinar, you're going to receive an email. That email will have a link. I saw a question there about getting access to this report that we just showed. So there'll be a link for you to be able to get the highlights to the report. So look for that. And then also, as I mentioned, if you like today's content, be sure to register next week for the NSF Virtual Holiday Summit. It's December 9th and 10th. We're gonna have 2 days of breakout sessions, workshops, super panels, great networking opportunities, even though it's virtual, great networking opportunities. I've got an all-star lineup of speakers, as you can see here. I myself will actually be doing a session. Doesn't look like I made the speaker list here. I'll talk to Ron about that. But actually 2 of my panelists will be there, Jen Kramer and Garrett Mudd. We're gonna do a point counterpoint session on how agencies and properties can work together for the common good. So really excited about it. We're gonna talk sponsorship. There'll be sessions on ticket sales, marketing, diversity and inclusion. So for more information on the Holiday Summit, just visit the NSF's website, www.sports-forum.com. We hope that you can make it to that. And again, you'll see a link when you get the follow-up email from this session. So again, thank you to all the panelists. Really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Be well, everyone. Happy holidays.